So that expectation would lead me to be overwhelmed, and it's unrealistic. So making sure that you train the students, and a lot of my students have said, well, you know, by the end of this year, I'm going to be fluent in English. I'm like, good luck. I don't think that's going to happen. Let's sit down and let's talk about, let's discuss what might be a more realistic expectation. And what do you mean by fluency? If it means that you're going to go out and be able to have, you know, run into a foreigner on the street and have a conversation, very basic, absolutely. That's a great goal, and I think that you can achieve it. But if it means that you're going to do something extraordinary, it's always possible, but very unlikely, given the fact that most of our students have a lot of other classes they're taking at the same time. So I just try to work on them with making sure that they understand, number one, how to manage their time, how to set a timetable for themselves for studying, as well as how to make goals for studying, because it will keep them from getting overwhelmed, and it will show them how to be deliberate. And it basically, what that does is it empowers them to know what they can and cannot accomplish. And when a person is empowered, they're more likely to be happy and to take risks and to play in the classroom because they feel like they can control it. Okay, so the next one, how does vulnerability impact language learners? I've talked a little bit about this, but these are the 5 points that she really brought out in her book. This is more like a continuation of our Cliff Notes, right? So we just talked about courage, and courage was basically being able to say, I'm lost, or I don't understand, or I need extra help on this. Can you help me? Even if you as the teacher can't help them, at least you might be able to direct them towards some resources that might, for example, this lovely resource center. Or, you know, some of the wonderful programs that either what is it? What's the English? I was going to say BBC. BBC has a lot of great, like, activities online. But I'm also supposed to talk about American. Thank you. Voice of America. Voice of America, and there's some other really wonderful programs that the U.S. Embassy sponsors as well. So even if you couldn't help them, at least you could show them where to get the help. And then compassion, that's another one that she talks about. And compassion, I see it in 2 ways, right? The first one is not often the one that we talk about a lot, but it's compassion for yourself. So most of the time, when I was a kid, before I learned about this kind of stuff, when I did something wrong, I didn't think like, oh, it's a learning experience. I thought I'm stupid, or I'm bad, or I can't get this, or I can't, something like that. I had to be trained in self-compassion, saying like, okay, I made a mistake, big deal. Let's try again. Maybe I won't make a mistake next time. But it's not something that comes naturally to us. What comes naturally to us is like, I'm a bad person, or this just confirms all the teacher's beliefs that I can't learn Spanish, or whatever it is that your issue is. Okay, so the other part of compassion is, as teachers, do we show compassion to students? And this takes actually looking at what the definition of compassion really is. So basically, compassion, let me find it, there's some other stuff that I wrote in here. I'll just go from the top. Compassion for yourself is allowing that it's okay to make mistakes, and it does not mean anything good or bad about yourself. So, oftentimes, okay, so that's what it is for yourself. For the second one, for other people, we frequently blame someone outside of ourselves if something goes wrong. You know, it's that shame game that we talked about earlier. It was so-and-so's fault. that X, Y, and Z wasn't done. You know, it wasn't my fault. I showed up to the meeting on time, I had everything prepared, but what didn't get done because he was late. And he wasn't on task and blah, 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 blah. I'm blaming him. I'm not showing compassion, am I? I'm showing blame. So basically, compassion is in that meeting, sitting down and saying, okay, we didn't accomplish what we needed to accomplish, but that's okay. You know, maybe he was late because something happened. We don't know. I don't know that, you know, there wasn't a car accident and the tram was stuck for 30 minutes while he had to wait and he was being, you know, really frustrated. I don't know what's going on in his life. But compassion is just sitting down with someone and saying, this is what happened, and it doesn't mean anything good or bad about you, it's just what happened. How many teachers do you know that do that with their students? No one. Very few teachers do that with their students, but can you imagine what it would be like if we did? How the students might open up a little bit more. It's not saying they can't be responsible. They still have to be responsible. They still have to do things, but just sitting down and saying, okay, so this happened. I know you're upset about it. I'm upset about it too. It happened, but that's it. It just happened. And not assigning blame. I think that's the biggest thing. Dr. Brown also says that for compassion, what we can do is just be with someone as their equal through that time of suffering. That's what compassion is. You're just being with someone as their equal. You're not saying, well, I told you. You shouldn't have taken the tram. You should have taken the metro. You know, that's already starting the blame game, right? That's not very compassionate. Just saying, ooh, I understand. That happened to me too once, and I missed a meeting. It was horrible. I felt really bad. That's being an equal. Okay. So, how compassion may help in the classroom is that if students know that they will not be blamed for doing something wrong, they're more likely to speak. They're more likely to take risks, calculated risks. And that's what we want them to be doing. And also, a student who already feels badly about themselves, if we do not show compassion, we do blame or we do something else, that's going to make their own psychological cycle worse. It will confirm that there's, in their mind, that there's something wrong with them. So that's how not using compassion in the classroom can impact the students. That's not the only way it impacts, but those are based on the research. That's what I came up with. Okay, so the next thing, again, compassion doesn't mean that you don't hold them accountable, because accountability is also a really big point in wholehearted living. What Dr. Brown noticed is that with the people who lived wholeheartedly, again, that means that they were able to look at vulnerability and go, ooh, okay, this is how I'm being, this is how I would like to be, and change, is that they held other people accountable for their actions, what they said, and basically their behavior. So it's one thing to sit with students and say, oh, it's okay, I understand your dog ate your homework. I had that happen to me too once. That's not going to be helpful in terms of getting them to do homework in the future, right? So that's where we don't necessarily want to use compassion in that way. What we want to do is we want to combine compassion with accountability and sit down and say, okay, that happened to me once as well, but you are still required to turn the homework in on the due date. That was an agreement that we made at the beginning of the class. So what happens now? How can I hold you accountable for not turning in the homework? And that's something that you want to address with students from the beginning of your course. You want to create, your list of rules with the students, engaging the students, and then you want to talk about what happens if the students break those rules. How can you hold them accountable? So for university students, it might look something like this. And that is that if you're having an issue with a student who is not turning in their paper, I had this happen. Basically, we do process writing in the university. And so they have like an outline, a free write, a first draft, a second draft, a third draft, and a final draft. And so one of the students wasn't turning in their drafts. And so I called them into my office, said, okay, so I've noticed that you haven't turned your homework in. What's going on? And I listened with compassion. I was not judging them. I was just trying to figure out what's going on. They said, all right, so here's the deal. When you came into this course, you were given a syllabus. And the syllabus outlined all of the expectations that I had for you. You agreed to abide by the syllabus. And I asked them, what does the syllabus say if you don't turn in your homework? Probably that they're going to get a 0 for that part of the course, right? And so then it's basically getting them to the point where they understand, so this is what's occurring. I'm making a conscious choice not to turn my homework in. There may be outside circumstances, but I have a conscious choice that these outside circumstances mean more than my grade in this course at this time. That's okay. But what I need them to realize is that that's going to result in an F. And that's holding them accountable. Because I'm not saying, oh, I'm so sorry, that's awful, I understand. But then turning around and giving them an F anyway. It's saying, look, this is what's going on. I understand it's a really hard time for you. Many of us struggle through many hard times in our life. But we still have to do the minimum of what's expected to us. Because we made a commitment. I made a commitment that I would be here for you. I will grade your papers. I will give you feedback. I will help you grow as a learner. But you made a commitment to me. And you're not being accountable for it. Okay? So that would be more or less what accountability looks like in the classroom. And for those of you who weren't here last week when we talked about positive classroom management techniques, when we get to the question-answer part of the session, if you would like to talk a little bit about that, I would be more than happy to, because there are more skills that you can use to create a positive environment in the classroom. So the other thing is talking about, with students, kind of talking to them about how to let go of what other people think about you. Because when you're comparing yourself to somebody else, it's always not going to end well. Well, no, that's not true. There are people that we all have in our lives where we can say, woo, phew, at least I'm not her. Or at least I'm not him. But this is not ideal. The only people we should compare ourselves to is ourselves. Because oftentimes when we compare to other people, we're not doing it, we're either demeaning them and pushing ourselves up, or we're demeaning ourselves. But when we compare to ourselves, all we have is ourselves. And so there's nothing bad nor good. It's just like, oh, I know I can do better on this. Let me do better. Last time I did this, now I can do this, and then the next time I can do this. And so we're constantly in a competition with ourselves. And we're looking at ourselves, rather than like, oh my gosh, she's a lawyer, has 5 children, is perfectly happy, and her husband is like the ambassador to name a country, and blah, 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 and what am I doing? right? It's the same in the language classroom. When we have students that are like, well, I don't understand how come so-and-so always gets everything in that one lesson. They don't have to go home and study like I do. You know, so students set themselves up and they start comparing themselves to the other students in the class. Sometimes we encourage this through competition, but we also have to make sure that they understand that this should be healthy competition. Not just like, one person is better than another person, go. But you have to compete with yourself. And you have to move beyond yourself. Alright, is everyone following me? Yeah. Okay? Alright, great. So I call that also letting go of what people think. Because when you're not comparing yourself with other people, you're not worried about what they're thinking about. You're worried about what you're thinking about and how you can improve and be a better person. The next one is letting go of perfectionism. This one's a really hard thing with me. What that means is that when you have a PowerPoint, for example, you don't spend 8 hours on 8 slides because the comma isn't right, or is it really saying what I want it to say? How can I make this better? How can I do this? How can I do that? It's saying, okay, this is the product, this is what I have, I'm going to go with it, I'm going to learn from the experience. If it's not perfect, then I always have time to improve it. But when I sit there and I think about, oh my gosh, what if the grammar in the paper isn't right? What if I didn't choose the right vocabulary word? What if I say this and it's not correct? What if I, you know, accidentally say he instead of she? What is that going to mean? Nothing. It's not going to mean anything. You just say it anyway, because no one expects you to be perfect. How many times have I already made mistakes when I was saying vulnerability, right? Did anyone count? It was like 5. And I'm a native speaker. Right? That's not perfect. And that could be very embarrassing. But I let go of perfectionism. Because if I was so worried about being perfect in those moments where I kept mispronouncing vulnerability, probably the entire presentation would have been like, and I would have just had to give up and say, okay, let's just discuss. You know, because I would have stopped myself, and I would have raised an affective filter, lowered an affective filter, whatever, however you want to say it, and I would have shut down. I would have said, oh my gosh, what are they going to be thinking? I can't believe I did that, I'm so stupid, how could I not have said that correctly? I mean, it's the title of my presentation, right? So I also try to do that with my students. And I will point out the times that I misspeak. And I will laugh about them, because I think that's important. I try to encourage them not to take themselves so seriously. Of course, you know, I am a very serious person. Like, I'm just woo, 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 woo. There used to be a joke that my colleagues called me the sergeant. The sergeant. Right? Because I'm so, like, direct and get things done, blah, blah, blah. So I had to learn to laugh at myself. Because sergeants, do they laugh? Think of the movies that you've seen, right? Have you ever seen a sergeant? Ha ha ha, that's okay. No, I don't think so. So this is all letting go of what people think and letting go of perfectionism. And I think that's one of the keys, or, okay, 5 of the keys to creating a safe environment in our classroom. And I think that that's why when I looked at these 2 books and I was like, okay, so yes, we have to create this sort of an atmosphere in our environment, but how do we do it? So to me, these are the keys of how we do it. But what's hard about that is, how do you translate that to actual actions in the classroom? How do you put that forward and say, okay, so this is going to be an activity in learning to let go. This is going to be an activity in compassion. You know, it's really hard, and I don't have the answers to that. I'm working on it. See me in about 6 years, because that's how long it took Brene Brown to get all of her information done. But I do have a book of other people who have looked into these ideas and thought about them. This book isn't yet, note the word, yet, in the ETRC, because it's my personal book, but it will be. And what this book is basically, it's called The Seeds of Confidence, and it's self-esteem activities for the ESL classroom. And basically, they're short activities. They could be like 20 minutes to an entire lesson, just one day. But they talk about, all the key ones are creating a sense of security. So what I like about these activities is you do the activity, you feel what it feels like to be secure, and then you talk about how you can incorporate that into your real life. So it's the activity plus reflection. Oftentimes we do the activity and then like, yeah, did that make sense? And there's no time for reflection. But reflection is actually the key. Because if you remembered when I mentioned the story about when I know that I'm feeling shame. Do you remember what I said? When I know I'm feeling shame, how I react. Like I get flushed, right? And maybe my heart's going like this and I start attack. So unless I have reflective skills, I wouldn't know what was happening. I had to get to a point where I was writing in a journal and saying, this is interesting, my cheeks are flushed, I'm having a moment. So I used to call it my moment. And then I started thinking further about it and writing more and more of the physical symptoms that I have when I'm feeling vulnerable or when I feel like somebody else is shaming me, so that I can break the cycle that I'm used to going through and try a different way of doing it, a more positive way of getting out of the shame cycle and getting into the idea of vulnerability. And so these activities can help you. So I started, and I didn't finish. Chapter 1 is a sense of security. Chapter 2 is a sense of identity. Chapter 3 is a sense of belonging. Chapter 4 is a sense of purpose. And Chapter 5 is a sense of competence. And I hope that you can see from the titles that they are very much directly related to what we've just talked about. You know, a sense of competence. What's another way of saying that? Maybe it helps with self-esteem, right? If you feel competent, your self-esteem will be raised a little bit. It also goes back to this slide, right? The belief that they are fully capable. If you've developed your confidence, you also have developed a belief that you are fully capable of doing something. That's why you're confident. You know you can do it. Right? And so this was the foundation, the fully capable, was the foundation of this idea of wholehearted learning. Right? They know that they can do it. It may take time, it may take energy, but they can do it. So